Sarah Chen stood at the window of the diplomatic shuttle, her breath catching as she saw the luminary homeworld for the first time. The planet looked like a giant diamond floating in space, its crystalline surface catching and reflecting the light of its three suns. After 6 months of space travel, she was finally here, the first human diplomat to visit the luminary. Ambassador Chen, we're beginning our descent, the pilot announced. The luminary landing protocols are quite specific. Sarah nodded, smoothing down her formal diplomatic uniform. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully chosen. The deep blue of Earth's diplomatic corps, accented with silver threading that she hoped would appeal to the crystal-loving luminary. Her short black hair was neatly styled, and she wore minimal jewelry, unsure of how the luminary would interpret such decorations. The shuttle descended through layers of shimmering atmosphere, each one a different color than the last. As they got closer, Sarah could see that what looked like crystal from space was actually a complex network of living structures, growing and shifting slightly in the triple sunlight. Remember, she whispered to herself, bow 3 times, keep your eyes down, speak only when spoken to. The briefing documents about luminary protocol had been extensive, and she had memorized every detail. The landing pad was a flat expanse of what looked like pure diamond, surrounded by towering spires that seemed to sing in the wind. As Sarah stepped out of the shuttle, she saw her welcoming committee, a group of tall, elegant aliens whose skin seemed to shimmer with internal light. The luminary were humanoid in basic shape, but their skin was translucent, showing traces of the complex network of light-carrying vessels beneath. They wore elaborate robes that seemed to be made of living crystal, each movement causing cascades of rainbow reflections. At the center of the group stood one figure who shone brighter than the rest. Princess Crystalia, heir to the luminary throne, was even more striking than the holographic recordings had shown. Her skin pulsed with patterns of light that seemed to respond to her emotions, and her crystal crown grew directly from her forehead in delicate, impossible spires. Sarah began the traditional greeting, bowing deeply 3 times as practiced. On the 3rd bow, something unexpected happened. A ray of light from one of the suns reflected off a crystal spire and directly into her eyes. She blinked, looked up instinctively, and found herself staring directly into the princess's eyes. The gathered luminary gasped in horror. Direct eye contact with royalty was strictly forbidden. It was considered an act of aggression, a challenge to their authority. Sarah saw the princess's guards tense, their skin flickering with angry red patterns. In that split second, Sarah had a choice. She could immediately look down and beg forgiveness, as protocol demanded. It would be the safe choice, the expected choice. But in the princess's eyes, which were like swirling pools of liquid crystal, Sarah saw something unexpected: curiosity. Instead of looking down, Sarah did something unprecedented. She maintained eye contact and spoke clearly. "Your Highness, among my people, looking into someone's eyes is our highest form of respect. It means we see you, truly see you, and offer our complete honesty and attention. I offer you this respect freely, though I understand it differs from your customs." The chamber fell silent. The guards' hands tightened on their crystal weapons. The other diplomats held their breath. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Princess Crystalia did something that shocked her entire court. She laughed. It was a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "How fascinating," she said, her voice carrying musical undertones. "No one has dared look me in the eyes since I was a child. Please, Ambassador Chen, tell me more about these human customs of yours." The tension in the room shifted to confusion, then cautious interest. Sarah caught glimpses of the other luminary, exchanging glances, their skin patterns showing a mix of shock and intrigue. She had broken every rule in the diplomatic handbook, and somehow it had worked. The first step in her mission had been taken, though not at all as planned. As she followed the princess into the palace, Sarah couldn't help but smile slightly. Sometimes it seemed the best diplomacy came not from following the rules, but from knowing when to break them with grace. 3 days into her stay at the Crystal Palace, Sarah found herself facing yet another test. Princess Crystalia had invited her to participate in the morning light ritual, a complex ceremony that most alien diplomats spent years learning before attempting. "The ritual will begin in 1 hour," announced Lord Prism, the palace protocol master. His skin flickered with smug purple patterns. "I trust you have studied the traditional movements, Ambassador Chen." Sarah kept her face carefully neutral. She knew the protocol master had deliberately given her almost no time to prepare. "I look forward to learning your traditions, Lord Prism," she replied diplomatically. After he left, Sarah quickly pulled out her tablet and searched through the limited information Earth had about the ritual. The descriptions were confusing. Something about moving in harmony with the 3 suns while holding crystal chalices filled with light essence. When she arrived at the ritual chamber, Sarah saw 5 other alien diplomats already there. They wore elaborate crystal robes and looked thoroughly nervous despite their years of preparation. The chamber itself was beautiful but intimidating. A dome made of shifting crystal panels that caught and amplified the morning sunlight. Princess Crystalia entered, her skin glowing with morning light patterns. "Welcome to the morning light ritual," she announced. As is tradition, each diplomat must complete the ritual correctly or face immediate dismissal from our world. Sarah's heart beat faster, but she kept her expression calm. She watched as the first alien diplomat stepped forward. He moved carefully through a series of complex gestures, his crystal chalice catching the light. Everything seemed perfect until the final turn. He moved slightly too fast, and light spilled from his chalice. The luminary guards immediately escorted him out. 2 more diplomats failed. One dropped her chalice. Another mixed up the order of the movements. The 4th managed to complete it, but his movements were stiff and nervous. The 5th passed with slightly more grace. Then it was Sarah's turn. As she stepped forward, she noticed something interesting about how the crystal panels in the dome were moving. They weren't random. They were responding to the movement of the 3 suns. Instead of trying to copy the exact movements she'd seen, Sarah did something different. She watched the patterns of light flowing through the dome and moved with them, letting her body follow the natural flow of light. She held her chalice loosely, allowing it to become part of the movement rather than trying to control it perfectly. The luminary court watched in surprise as Sarah danced with the light itself. Her movements weren't traditional, but they matched the spirit of the ritual perfectly. The light in her chalice didn't just stay contained. It created beautiful patterns that complemented the crystal dome's natural movements. When she finished, Princess Crystalia's skin was pulsing with bright gold patterns of excitement. "Remarkable," she exclaimed. "Ambassador Chen, you didn't perform the traditional movements at all." "Your Highness," Sarah replied carefully, "I observed that your crystal architecture moves in harmony with the suns. I thought the true spirit of the ritual might be about joining that harmony rather than following exact steps." Lord Prism's skin flashed angry red. "This is outrageous. The ritual has been performed the same way for 10,000 years. But Princess Crystalia held up her hand, and perhaps that is why it has lost some of its meaning. She turned to Sarah. "You saw past the surface to understand the heart of our tradition. That is far more valuable than mindless repetition." Some of the older luminary nobles looked scandalized, but Sarah noticed younger members of the court watching with interest. Their skin patterns showed curiosity and excitement. "Ambassador Chen," the princess continued, "would you join me for breakfast? I would like to hear more about how humans view tradition and adaptation." As Sarah followed the princess, she heard Lord Prism muttering about humans and their disregard for proper protocol. But she also noticed something interesting. His skin patterns had shifted from angry red to a thoughtful blue-green. Perhaps, Sarah thought, there was more than one way to build diplomatic bridges. Sometimes understanding the spirit of a tradition was more important than following its exact rules. Sarah couldn't sleep. The crystal guest chamber was beautiful, with walls that glowed softly in the night, but something felt wrong. She sat at her desk, reviewing diplomatic messages on her tablet when a strange pattern caught her eye. Hidden in the regular diplomatic traffic was an encrypted message that shouldn't have been there. Using the decryption skills she'd learned during diplomat training, Sarah worked through the night to break the code. As the largest sun began to rise, turning the crystal walls pink, she finally understood the message. Her hands began to shake. The Void Collective, a group of species that lived in the darkest parts of space, was planning to attack both Earth and the luminary homeworld. They would strike within 2 months, and their weapons could crack even the strongest crystal defenses. Sarah rushed to request an emergency meeting with Princess Crystalia. The guards led her to the morning chamber, where the princess was performing her daily light meditation. "Your Highness," Sarah said, bowing quickly, "I have discovered something urgent." The princess opened her eyes, her skin showing gentle blue patterns of calm. "What could be so important that you interrupt the sacred morning meditation, Ambassador Chen?" Sarah explained about the encrypted message and the coming attack. But instead of looking worried, the princess smiled. "Ah, you speak of the Dark Ones," she said. "There is no need for concern. Our ancient prophecies tell us that the luminary can never fall. Our crystal cities have stood for 1,000,000 years." "Your Highness." Sarah tried again. "The Void Collective has new weapons. They found a way to." "Enough." Lord Prism stepped out from behind a crystal column. "How dare you question our sacred prophecies? Princess, this human clearly doesn't understand our ways." The princess's skin rippled with uncertain colors. "Ambassador Chen, while I appreciate your concern, our prophecies have never been wrong. They are carved into the first crystal itself." Sarah thought quickly. She needed to convince them without causing offense. She noticed the princess was holding a crystal cup filled with morning light. "Your Highness, may I demonstrate something?" Sarah asked. When the princess nodded, Sarah took out her tablet. "This is a recording of a Void Collective weapon test from last week." She played the video, which showed a beam of dark energy striking a crystal structure similar to the luminary buildings. The crystal shattered instantly. The princess's cup slipped from her fingers, but Sarah caught it before it could break. The room fell silent. "Impossible," Lord Prism whispered, his skin turning pale gray with fear. "The prophecies say the luminary cannot fall," Sarah said carefully, handing the cup back to the princess. "But perhaps they don't guarantee victory without action. Like this cup, I had to catch it to prevent it from breaking. Maybe the prophecies are telling you that you have the ability to survive, not that survival is automatic." Princess Crystalia's skin began to pulse with deep purple, the color of deep thought. "Your words, they make a strange kind of sense. But the Council of Elders will never listen to this interpretation. They believe questioning the prophecies in any way is forbidden." "Then we need to find proof they can't ignore," Sarah said. "Your Highness, I believe there's a reason my people and yours met now, just before this threat. Humans are good at finding new solutions to old problems. Let us help you." The princess was quiet for a long moment. Finally, her skin shifted to a determined gold color. "Lord Prism, please leave us. Ambassador Chen and I need to discuss this privately." After he left, she turned to Sarah. "Tell me everything you know about these weapons and why you think we can stop them." As Sarah began explaining, she noticed something remarkable. In the crystal walls around them, the reflections of Earth and the luminary homeworld had aligned perfectly, forming a single, stronger light. The celestial ball was the biggest event in the luminary calendar. The great crystal ballroom sparkled with light from all 3 suns, and important guests from 50 different worlds filled the space. Sarah stood near one of the crystal columns, watching the crowds while trying to look like she was simply enjoying the party. She wore a dress that combined earth and luminary styles, flowing blue fabric with crystal threads that caught the light. But hidden under the elegant dress was her diplomatic security gear. Something didn't feel right about tonight. Princess Crystalia stood at the center of the room, her skin glowing with formal patterns of white and gold. She was surrounded by nobles and diplomats, all trying to get her attention. But Sarah noticed she kept glancing toward the human ambassador, their secret worry about the Void Collective creating an invisible bond between them. "Beautiful evening, isn't it, Ambassador Chen?" The voice belonged to Ambassador Shade from the Shadow Nebula. His black scales seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Indeed," Sarah replied politely, but she noticed his eyes kept darting to the crystal chandeliers above the princess. Following his gaze, she spotted something that made her heart race. Tiny dark spots on 3 of the crystals, barely visible. Sarah had studied Earth's historical assassination attempts. Those spots looked exactly like the kind of devices that could be used to drop something, or someone, onto a target below. She needed to warn the princess, but she couldn't just run over and cause a scene. That would violate every rule of Luminary Protocol and might trigger the assassins to act immediately. She had to be clever. Sarah began to dance, moving slowly through the crowd. Each step brought her closer to the princess, while following the formal patterns of the Luminary court dance she'd learned. When another dancer came near her, she whispered, "The chandeliers look a bit dim tonight, don't they?" The dancer, a young Luminary noble, looked up. His skin flashed orange with alarm as he noticed the dark spots. He whispered to another dancer, who whispered to another. Soon, several Luminary were discreetly looking up while continuing to dance. Ambassador Shade moved suddenly toward the wall panel that controlled the crystal lights. Sarah saw him reach for a hidden button. Without breaking her dance steps, she spun gracefully between him and the panel. "Oh, Ambassador Shade," she said loudly, "you must tell me about the Shadow Nebula's famous light-absorbing crystals. We have nothing like them on Earth." He was forced to stop and respond, his hand moving away from the button. Sarah noticed his scales rippling with anger, but he had to maintain his polite diplomat smile. Meanwhile, the Luminary guards had noticed the dark spots. They moved into position quietly, using the dancers for cover. Sarah kept Ambassador Shade talking while continuing to dance, making sure to stay between him and the control panel. Suddenly, he pushed her aside and lunged for the button. Sarah used a self-defense move disguised as a dance spin, her dress flaring out as she blocked him again. This time, the guards were ready. They surrounded Ambassador Shade while others quickly removed the dark devices from the chandeliers. "What is the meaning of this?" Princess Crystalia's voice carried across the ballroom. Her skin was flashing with angry red and gold patterns. "Your Highness," Sarah bowed, still slightly out of breath from her dance fight. "I believe Ambassador Shade was about to demonstrate how Shadow Nebula technology affects Luminary crystals. Fortunately, your guards were curious about the demonstration as well." The princess's eyes moved from the dark spots on the chandeliers to Ambassador Shade, then to Sarah. Her skin changed to show patterns that Sarah had never seen before. A mix of shock, gratitude, and admiration. The would-be assassin was led away, and the ball continued as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Sarah noticed the Luminary guards now watched her with respect rather than suspicion. And the princess. The princess kept looking at her with an expression that seemed to ask, "What other surprises do humans have?" The day after the celestial ball, Princess Crystalia invited Sarah to her private crystal garden. It was a beautiful place where light played through crystal flowers, creating rainbow patterns everywhere. But Sarah could tell something was wrong. The princess's skin was showing dull gray patterns, a sign of deep distress. "Ambassador Chen." "Sarah," the princess said quietly, using her first name for the first time. "I need to tell you something, but the crystal walls have too many ears." She touched a small crystal on her wrist, and a bubble of silence formed around them. "Your Highness," Sarah asked, concerned by this unusual behavior. "The Council of Elders has arranged my marriage," the princess said. Her skin flickered with unhappy colors. "I am to wed Ambassador Void, the representative of the Void Collective. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The same Void Collective that's planning to attack us. They say it will prevent war. The princess's voice was bitter. The marriage ceremony is in 3 days. After that, I will travel to their dark hub for what they call cultural exchange. My father, the king, has already agreed. Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a trap. Once the princess was in the dark hub, the Void Collective would have a royal hostage. They could demand anything from the luminary. Have you told the council about the attack plans we discovered? Sarah asked. I tried. The princess touched one of the crystal flowers, and it dimmed slightly. They said my evidence wasn't strong enough. They believe this marriage will solve everything. Sarah thought carefully before speaking. Your Highness on Earth, we have a saying. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. This marriage offer came very suddenly, didn't it? Yes, the princess admitted. Just after the assassination attempt failed. And the Void Collective has never shown interest in diplomatic marriages before. Never. The princess's skin started showing patterns of realization. In fact, they've always refused to participate in our cultural ceremonies. Sarah nodded. I think they're changing tactics. When violence didn't work, they chose deception. But what can I do? The princess's skin pulsed with frustration. If I refuse, I'll be going against my father's orders and breaking an ancient law about royal obedience. Then we need proof, Sarah said firmly. Proof so clear that even the Council of Elders can't ignore it. And we need it before the wedding. The princess looked at her curiously. You say we as if this is your problem too. Your Highness, Earth and the luminary might be different, but we both face the same threat. Where I come from, that makes us allies. Sarah smiled. Besides, I've grown quite fond of your crystal world. I'd hate to see it destroyed because of a fake marriage proposal. For the first time that day, the princess's skin showed a flash of gold. Hope. The Void Collective's representatives are staying in the North Tower, but it's impossible to get in there without being seen. Sarah's smile grew wider. On Earth, we have another saying. Impossible just means no one has done it yet. She looked up at the crystal ceiling. Tell me, do all these crystal panels reflect light the same way? No, the princess said, beginning to look interested. Some are one way, allowing light in but not out. We use them for privacy. And would anyone notice if 2 more panels were installed in the North Tower? The princess's skin suddenly lit up with understanding. Sarah Chen, she said, using the human's full name with newfound respect. I think it's time you learned about luminary crystal crafting. As they began planning, neither of them noticed Lord Prism watching from behind a distant crystal tree. His skin showed very confusing patterns indeed, a mix of suspicion, worry, and, surprisingly, hope. Everything changed on the morning of the wedding. Sarah was helping the princess adjust her crystal crown when the palace alarms started ringing. Through the window, they saw a massive dark ship appearing in the sky. The advance fleet of the Void Collective had arrived early. They're not waiting for the wedding, Sarah said, quickly pulling out her tablet. They must know we're onto their plan. The princess's skin flickered with fear patterns, but she stood tall. The guards will be here soon to take me to the safety bunker. No, Sarah said firmly. That's exactly what they want. Ambassador Void will be waiting there to protect you. She looked at her tablet, showing a palace map. We need to get to the Crystal Heart Chamber. That's forbidden. The princess gasped. Only the king can enter the Heart Chamber. It's an automatic death sentence for anyone else. Then we better not get caught, Sarah said, grabbing the princess's hand. They ran through the crystal corridors as chaos erupted around them. Guards were running everywhere, their skin flashing with alarm patterns. They turned a corner and found Ambassador Void waiting with 4 dark-armored soldiers. His body seemed to absorb all light around him. Princess, he said smoothly, how fortunate I found you. Let me escort you to safety. Sarah stepped in front of the princess. "Your Highness, look at his hands." The princess looked and saw what Sarah had noticed. Ambassador Void was holding a dark crystal control device, the kind used to control their city-destroying weapons. "Clever human," Ambassador Void growled. "Too clever for your own good." He raised the device. Sarah didn't hesitate. She threw her tablet at his hand, knocking the device away. The princess, understanding instantly, used her crystal powers to create a blinding flash of light. The dark soldiers staggered back, and Sarah pulled the princess down a side corridor. "The heart chamber is just ahead," the princess said as they ran. "But the death sentence—" "Trust me," Sarah said. They reached the huge crystal doors of the chamber. "Your prophecies say the luminary cannot fall, right? Then trust your prophecies." The princess touched the door, and it opened. Inside was a massive crystal heart, pulsing with light from all three suns. The moment they entered, crystal spears grew from the walls, pointing at them. "Princess," Lord Prism's voice rang out as he ran into the chamber behind them. "Stop. This human has made you break our most sacred law." But Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the crystal heart. "Your Highness, what do you see in the heart's light?" The princess stared at the shifting patterns. Her skin began to glow with understanding. "The prophecy. It's not what we thought. Look at how the light bends and adapts. It's not about standing unchanging. It's about learning to change while staying true to our core." The crystal spears stopped growing. Instead, they began to shimmer with new light. "Impossible," Lord Prism whispered. "No," the princess said, her voice growing stronger. "Not impossible. Evolution. Just as the crystal heart adapts to preserve its light, we must adapt to preserve our people." She turned to Sarah. "You risked death to show me this truth." Sarah smiled. Sometimes the greatest courage is being willing to question what everyone thinks is absolute truth. The whole chamber began to pulse with light. Outside, they could hear the sounds of battle as the Void Collective began their attack. But something was different now. The crystal heart was changing, its light growing stronger in new ways. "Your Highness," Sarah said, "I think your ancestors left you more than just prophecies. They left you weapons. Weapons that could adapt to any threat, if only someone was brave enough to look at them in a new way." The princess's skin glowed with determination. "Lord Prism, sound the ancient defense call. It's time to show the Void Collective why the prophecies say we cannot fall." She looked at Sarah with newfound respect. "And it's time to show them what happens when luminary wisdom meets human courage." The crystal heart chamber had become their war room. Sarah watched in amazement as Princess Crystalia used her newly discovered powers to create a three-dimensional map of the battle in the air. The Void Collected ships appeared as dark spots against the crystal light. "Our warriors are in position," reported General Crystal, his skin showing battle-ready red patterns. "But the enemy's dark energy weapons are unlike anything we've faced before." Sarah studied the map carefully. The luminary warriors were skilled, but they fought in perfect, unchanging formations, exactly what the Void Collective would expect. "Your Highness," Sarah said, "may I make a suggestion?" The princess nodded. Her skin was glowing with a mix of worry and determination. "On Earth, we learned that sometimes the best defense isn't a perfect formation, but being unpredictable." Sarah pointed to the map. "The Void Collective has studied your traditional battle patterns. They know exactly what you'll do. So let's do something they won't expect. Break formation." General Crystal's skin flashed with shock. "That goes against 1,000 years of military tradition." "Exactly." Sarah smiled. "That's why they won't see it coming. Look here." She pointed to groups of luminary ships. Instead of one large formation, split into smaller groups. Some attack, some defend, some hide in the crystal tower's reflections. Keep them guessing. The princess watched Sarah closely. "Like the morning light ritual, following the spirit of our ways rather than just the rules." "Yes," Sarah grew excited. "And there's more. Your crystal ships can bend light, right? Use that." Make fake images of ships. Hide your real ones in plain sight. On Earth, we call this guerrilla warfare, fighting smart instead of just fighting hard. General Crystal looked unhappy, but the princess's skin showed patterns of interest. "Show me," she commanded. Sarah spent the next hour teaching them Earth military tactics. She showed them how smaller ships could confuse bigger ones, how to use the crystal towers as mirrors to appear in multiple places at once, and how to turn the Void Collective's dark energy against them by reflecting it back unexpectedly. But the most important thing, Sarah explained, is that each group leader needs to think for themselves. They need permission to make quick decisions based on what's happening, not just follow old rules. "That's not how we fight," a young captain said, but his skin was showing patterns of excitement rather than doubt. "Exactly," Sarah replied. "And that's why it will work." The princess made her decision. "General Crystal, reorganize our forces. Captain Light, take your fastest ships and practice these new movements. We attack in 1 hour." As the warriors rushed to prepare, Lord Prism approached Sarah. His skin showed complicated patterns she'd never seen before. "Ambassador Chen," he said formally, "I have spent my life protecting our traditions. I thought that meant never changing them." He paused. "I was wrong. Thank you for helping us see our ways in a new light." Sarah bowed respectfully. "Your traditions are still strong, Lord Prism. You're just adding new layers to them, like your crystal towers grow new layers while keeping their core." The princess joined them, her skin now glowing with pure gold determination. Through the crystal walls, they could see the luminary ships beginning to move in new patterns, breaking apart and reforming in ways that had never been seen before. "The Void Collective thinks they know everything about us," the princess said. "They think we're predictable, unchanging." She turned to Sarah with a smile. "Let's show them how wrong they are." As they watched, the first group of crystal ships launched into battle, their movements fluid and unpredictable, their light-bending powers used in completely new ways. For the first time since the attack began, Sarah felt real hope. The luminary were evolving, growing stronger by learning to change. And somewhere in the dark fleet above, she knew the Void Collective was about to learn a very surprising lesson about underestimating both the luminary and humans. Princess Crystalia stood before the Council of Elders, her skin glowing with a confidence Sarah had never seen before. The battle in space was still raging, but the princess had insisted on calling this emergency meeting. "Honorable Elders," the princess's voice rang through the crystal chamber. "Our world faces its greatest threat, and we must change how we fight if we want to survive." The oldest elder, his skin showing deep purple patterns of disapproval, spoke up. "The old ways have protected us for thousands of years. You dare question them now?" "I don't question their wisdom," the princess replied. "I question our understanding of them." She waved her hand, and the crystal walls showed images of the battle above. The new battle formations were working. The Void Collective ships were struggling to hit their targets. Sarah watched from the side of the chamber, admiring how the princess handled the situation. Just 2 weeks ago, she would have backed down before the elders. Now she stood her ground. "Look," the princess continued. "Our warriors are still using our crystal technology, still following the light's guidance, but they're doing it in new ways, ways that honor the spirit of our traditions while adapting to new threats." Another elder spoke up, her skin flickering with uncertainty. "But the prophecies say we cannot fall," the princess interrupted. "They don't say we cannot change. In fact, look at this." She touched the crystal wall, and it showed the ancient prophecies written in light. The words talk about flowing like light through crystal. Light doesn't stay still. It bends, reflects, adapts. Why shouldn't we? Sarah noticed something interesting happening. The younger council members were showing skin patterns of agreement. Even some of the older ones seemed thoughtful. Suddenly, the chamber shook. A Void Collective ship had broken through the first line of defense. "We don't have time for long debates," the princess said firmly. "I've seen how effective these new tactics are. I ask for emergency powers to command our forces as needed." The oldest elder stood up angrily. "This is because of the human's influence. She has poisoned your mind against our ways." "No," Sarah spoke up, stepping forward. "I only showed her what was already in your traditions, the ability to adapt and grow stronger. Just like your crystal towers grow new layers while keeping their core strong." The chamber shook again. Through the walls, they could see more Void Collective ships approaching. The princess's skin flashed with determination. "I am not asking you to abandon our ways. I'm asking you to let them evolve. Like the crystal heart showed us. Change to preserve what matters most." One by one, the younger council members stood up, their skin showing support patterns. Then some of the middle-aged ones joined them. Finally, even Lord Prism stood. "My life has been devoted to our traditions," he said, "and I have learned that sometimes protecting tradition means letting it grow in new ways." He bowed to the princess. "You have my support." The chamber shook a third time, harder now. The oldest elder looked around at his colleagues, then at the battle outside. His skin showed a complicated mix of emotions. "The vote must be unanimous," he said quietly. Then, slowly, he stood. Perhaps it is time for this old crystal to learn new ways of reflecting light." The princess's skin burst into patterns of pure joy and determination. She immediately began giving new orders through the crystal communication system. More ships broke formation, using Sarah's tactics. The Void Collective's advance began to slow. Sarah watched with pride as the princess took control of the situation. She had done more than just change their battle tactics. She had started a peaceful revolution in Luminary society. As she watched the princess confidently giving orders, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest victories happen not on the battlefield, but in the quiet chambers where people find the courage to change. The situation was getting desperate. Despite the new tactics, the Void Collective's main fleet had arrived. Hundreds of dark ships filled the sky, their weapons charging to strike at the Crystal City. Sarah and Princess Crystalia stood in the Crystal Heart Chamber, watching the battle through the walls. The princess's skin showed exhaustion patterns. She had been directing troops for hours without rest. "Their numbers are too great," General Crystal reported, his skin pale with worry. "Even with our new tactics, we can't hold them all back." Sarah studied the Crystal Heart, which was pulsing faster than usual. An idea started forming in her mind. "Your Highness, remember how you said the Crystal Heart adapts to preserve its light?" The princess looked at her curiously. "Yes, but—" "And your ships can bend and reflect light, right?" Sarah's eyes were bright with excitement. "What if we could use the Crystal Heart's power to connect all your ships together? Create one massive light network?" Lord Prism stepped forward, his skin showing alarm. "The Crystal Heart has never been used as a weapon. It's sacred." "Not as a weapon," Sarah explained quickly. "As a shield. Look." She pointed to the crystal walls where the battle raged. "Your ships are fighting well individually, but the Void Collective is still too strong. But if every crystal ship could share power, reflect light together." The princess's skin began to glow with understanding. "Like the crystal towers in our city, they strengthen each other's light." "Exactly." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "One ship's light might not be enough to stop their dark energy weapons. But what about the combined light of every ship, every crystal tower, all connected through the heart?" "It's never been done," General Crystal said, but his skin was showing interest patterns now. The power required would be enormous. The princess walked to the Crystal Heart, placing her hand on its surface. "I can feel it. The heart wants to help. It's been waiting for someone to understand." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the city. The Void Collective had broken through the outer defenses. Their dark ships were moving into position for a final attack. "We have to try," Sarah said urgently. "Your Highness, you can connect with the heart better than anyone. Let it guide you." The princess took a deep breath, her skin glowing brighter. "Everyone, place your hands on the crystal walls. Let your light join with the hearts." As they all touched the crystal surfaces, something amazing happened. The heart's pulses grew stronger, and patterns of light began spreading through the walls, up the towers, and into the ships above. Each crystal surface began to glow brighter and brighter. "The Void Collective is firing their main weapons," General Crystal shouted. "Now," Sarah called out, "everyone, think about protecting our light, sharing our strength." The princess's skin blazed like a sun as she channeled power through the heart. Above the city, every luminary ship, every crystal tower, every tiny crystal flower suddenly lit up with the same bright glow. As the dark energy weapons struck, something unprecedented happened. Instead of shattering, the crystal surfaces caught the dark energy and began passing it around their network, each crystal taking a small part of the strain. The combined light of the entire city and all its ships created a shield so bright it looked like a new sun had been born. The Void Collective fired again and again, but each time their energy was caught and dispersed through the crystal network. Their ultimate weapons, designed to shatter crystal, couldn't break through when every crystal worked together. Sarah watched in awe as the princess coordinated this incredible defense, her skin glowing with patterns no one had ever seen before. She had combined the old power of the crystal heart with new ideas about sharing strength, creating something entirely new. Through the crystal walls, they could see the Void Collective ships beginning to retreat. Their weapons were useless against this unified defense. The prophecy had been right. The luminary could not fall, not because they were unchanging, but because they had learned to change together. A week after the great battle, the Crystal City sparkled more beautifully than ever. The crystal towers had grown new layers, incorporating the shared light patterns they had learned during the battle. Sarah stood in the great hall, preparing for her final meeting with Princess Crystalia before returning to Earth. The princess entered the hall, her skin glowing with patterns that mixed joy and sadness. For the first time, she wasn't surrounded by guards or advisors. She walked directly to Sarah and did something that shocked everyone present. She bowed to the human diplomat. "Your Highness," Sarah protested. "You shouldn't." "I should," the princess interrupted, straightening up. And for once, I'm speechless. Her skin flickered with emotional patterns. "You came to our world as a diplomat. You learned our ways. But more importantly, you helped us see our own ways more clearly." Lord Prism stepped forward, his skin showing new patterns of respect. "Ambassador Chen, you broke many of our protocols." He paused, and to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "And by breaking them with wisdom and courage, you helped us make better ones." The great hall was filled with luminary nobles and officials. Many of them had once looked at Sarah with suspicion. Now their skin showed patterns of admiration and gratitude. "The Council of Elders has made a decision," the princess announced. "We are creating a new position, Guardian of Change. This person will help us grow while keeping our core traditions strong." She smiled at Sarah. "We would be honored if you would help us choose someone suitable." Sarah looked around the hall, then back at the princess. "Your Highness, I think you already have the perfect person." She gestured to the princess herself. "You've shown you can respect the old ways while embracing new ones. You understand both tradition and change." The princess's skin flashed with surprise, then began to glow with understanding. The council members nodded in agreement, their skin showing approval patterns. "There's more," the princess said. "We want to create a permanent alliance between Earth and the Luminary. Not just for defense, but for learning from each other." She waved her hand, and the crystal walls showed images of Earth. "Your world has so many different cultures, all changing and growing together. We want to learn from that." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "I would be honored to help build that alliance." Then the princess did something even more unexpected. She removed a small crystal from her crown and held it out to Sarah. The entire hall gasped. "This is a piece of the first crystal," the princess explained. "It has never left our world before. But you taught us that some rules should change." She placed it in Sarah's hand. Let it be a symbol of the bridge between our worlds." The crystal felt warm in Sarah's hand, and to her amazement, it began to glow with its own light. The princess smiled. "It recognizes you," she said, "just as you recognize the truth in our ways, even when we had forgotten it ourselves." As Sarah prepared to leave, the princess walked with her to the shuttle. Away from the crowd, the princess spoke quietly. "You know, when you first arrived and looked me in the eyes, I thought you were either very brave or very foolish." Her skin showed amusement patterns. "Now I understand you were both, and that's exactly what we needed." Sarah laughed. "Sometimes the foolish thing and the brave thing are the same thing." The princess's skin glowed with warm patterns of friendship. "Visit us again soon, Sarah Chen. Our crystal towers may grow new layers, but our friendship will remain constant." As the shuttle took off, Sarah held the first crystal piece carefully. Through it, she could see both Earth and the luminary world reflected together, their lights combining to create something new and beautiful. Sometimes, she thought, the greatest diplomatic victories came not from following the rules, but from having the courage to help others see their rules in a new light.